You know what I'm going to do?
No.
I'm going to find an AI and have that AI edit this episode.
Amazing. Love it. Hello and welcome to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. My name is Frederik van Deurs. I'm the CEO of Green Innovation Group. We are a management consulting firm that are dedicated to decarbonizing the healthcare sector. In the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast, we share tools and tactics about decarbonization within healthcare. And today we're going to talk about generative AI. It's a topic that is very much on the mind of a lot of people in the industry right now, but it seems that it's difficult for folks to grasp just how generative AI might help decarbonize the healthcare sector or how it might be applied in the healthcare sector. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I brought Simon, the producer, to the show to help me facilitate the conversation. So I'm not talking only with myself, but I actually have a conversational partner. So welcome to the show, Simon. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me back again. It's a pleasure.
What was, Simon, you have obviously watched all of the episodes that we have produced. We haven't spoken that much about AI yet. What was your own personal introduction to AI?
Well, a few years back, I did a Danish television show called Swine Ding, which dived into tech, and we did a piece about AI and neural network and how they actually work. And it was actually quite difficult to explain on television how something that happens within a computer or a black box, how that works. But since then, I've been very fascinated by that and autonomous driving, for instance. Now you have ChatGPT on that computer there. I'm playing around with it quite a lot and using it professionally also.
How have you used it professionally? Now you're doing obviously media production, so there's a whole range of technical solutions that can assist there. But what are some concrete examples from the podcast where you've used it?
Subtitles, for instance. There's one AI developed by Zetland, the production news company. Where you can take an audio file, put it into their free service, and then half an hour later, you will get a transcript with whatever language it is. I think they cover most languages, Danish, English, whatever. Then you'll get a transcript. You can then take that transcript and put it into what is called a subtitle file, and put that into the editing software. And then you only have to do a few adjustments, but then you have subtitles, something that normally would take me hours to do.
So it actually produces an SRT file for you to add to the video.
Exactly.
File.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And then further on, now this is in English, of course, but sometimes I also do media productions where the language is Danish. We need English subtitles. Then I do the same, but then I ask ChatGPT to translate that, but in the SRT format as the subtitle format. And then again with a few minor adjustments, I just saved 2-3 hours of work.
Wow. Of highly skilled labor, actually.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing those. Personally, I had a bit of an interesting thing. I was asked by a friend in the startup ecosystem if I wanted to be an angel investor in a startup where ChatGPT was supposed to be the CEO, and I, of course, thought it was a very curious case. It was a manageable amount for my holding company to invest. So I said yes, and lo and behold, he announced that on LinkedIn that he had raised money for a startup that had ChatGPT as the CEO, and it exploded completely. It has been covered in a range of different media, and it's been a fun journey. And right now we're actually raising an actual seed round that probably will have closed when this episode is out. So I have, by accident, actually spent quite a lot of time with ChatGPT and have been quite impressed with the ability it has to do structural and analytical tasks at a relatively high first draft level.
Yeah.
So it will be able to compose a business strategy high level, but then if you ask it further and you dive into it and ask it to sort of roll out the implementation plan for the minor parts of the strategy. It will actually also be quite detailed.
Yeah.
It may not have human reasoning behind it and be able to sort of sense how and why option A might be a viable, good path to take, but option B is not. But the moment you ask it to tie it into a dollar value, it actually you can kind of trick the algorithm to make decisions and make business decisions. And that has been a really interesting experiment. So the business in mind is doing AI to AI apparel designs, and has actually, ChatGPT has been generating the prompts for another AI to generate the visuals. And then ChatGPT has decided where the prints should go on actual T-shirts and hoodies, and some of the choices it's making are quite curious.
Yeah.
It also made all of the web design for the web shop, and it chose a really strange font and positioning of text.
Yeah.
So when you see it, it looks a little bit like it was made by a person that didn't quite know the tool, but where it works. It's set up. It plays music, it makes coffee, kind of thing. but it does have a weird bi flavor. So that's a really interesting experiment that I'm taking part in.
I saw your website, and I actually like it in a weird retro kind of way.
Yeah, it's like
because
quirky.
we haven't seen web pages like that in a while.
It also designed. I don't know if you've seen the hoodie,
yeah.
but it's like a white classic hoodie with a pocket up front. Then it has a small logo on the chest. So far, so good. That's like stylish. That's easy, simple.
Yeah.
But then it has a print on the back that it's not quite big enough, but it's also not exactly small. So it's just the sizing just seems odd.
Okay.
And I feel like that's the style of all of the designs it has made. I have a lot of close friends that work in the fashion industry, and I've told them you're not going to lose your jobs as designers tomorrow, because those designs are. I think they're for those of us who have special needs and find the story fun enough to engage with it. But
you're definitely buying in on a story and a journey instead of an actual beautiful piece of garment.
Yeah, definitely.
What about the pictures of the models and T-shirts you have on your website? Is that also an
AI generated?
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm actually not sure about the ups and downs of how it works. But we're also, all the legal documents are produced by an AI with minimum human interference, only to ensure that it's actually compliant with legal regulations.
Of course, yeah.
But besides that, it's some of the investors that have invested in the company also facilitated the dialogue through their own ChatGPT. So we have had negotiations with investors and franchisees that have been fully communicated through ChatGPT only.
Okay. Wow.
That is just completely bonkers. The valuation was set by ChatGPT. The entire marketing strategy and budget is put together by ChatGPT. It's interesting. So that's my own personal entry point to it. But if we get back to decarbonizing the healthcare sector, obviously this has nothing. That had nothing to do with
That's
that.
That's just a fun story, but still, yeah.
But on Netflix is covering it. It's
really?
or they're considering to putting it on a show. CBS News has covered it for a documentary, so it's blowing up. But in other good news, in decarbonizing the healthcare sector, ChatGPT allegedly has passed the medical exam. We're going to dive into that. So apparently qualifying to become a medical doctor in the US. It's been able to log and note for general practitioners in clinics where they spend a lot of their time documenting and taking notes of the patient consultations. Mm-hmm. It's been able to provide assisting interpretations for novel cases of diseases. And it has been deployed as a first line of contact for emergency call response to help sort of before a human medical professional comes in and figures out how something should be categorized. There'll be a few screening questions through a ChatGPT setup model, and that has helped in some cases. I think there's a lot to be said about what's good and bad about it. And last but not least, I wanted for us to go over Chat IPCC. What is Chat IPCC, you might ask?
I actually don't know. So please enlighten me.
Chat IPCC is a language model that has been put together on the backbone of the IPCC reports. So it's able to answer questions around climate change and how we can address decarbonization based off of the texts in the IPCC reports that are quite comprehensive, several thousand pages of text, and massive studies, references that go really beyond what is actual comprehensive. So Chat IPCC, I thought we'd do a little bit of an interview with Chat IPCC towards the end.
Okay.
So I figure let's go through
cliffhanger.
This one and figure out what's what's up and down. So yeah, Simon, how would you feel about going to your own doctor, but the doctor is not there? You're faced with the screen, and you know it's operated by ChatGPT.
Actually, somehow I feel like I would be okay with it, because a doctor is a good human, but they don't know everything. They don't have the time to be updated on all the new information. But ChatGPT, at least it's if you feed it with new information, is up to date and can maybe come with, let's say, 5 examples of what you might be sick. Why you're sick.
I think something that could be really interesting is if it could have access to your entire medical history. In that way, it would be able to take your dental records, your hospital visits, your own GP records, your medical history with which drugs you've been prescribed and have taken, if you have any chronic diseases, etc. And it would be able to compose that full picture and actually triangulate in the diagnosis process and be able to just comprehend all of that data at once in a way that would take a lot of time for a human mind to process and comprehend. So I think that perspective to me is really, really interesting. For me, and then I think it would, of course, be something where you would have some medical professional that would validate.
Absolutely. I would never just trust, well, at least not for now, but I would never just trust an AI to diagnose me.
But the funny thing, now you say that, but let me ask you this. Have you ever gone to Google something when you felt off and trusted your findings?
Well, I am the son of a nurse, so I've always been very skeptical in all of that. So I looked up on the Danish net doctor. Then I thought, okay, I'm this is cancer or whatever. Then I called my mom, and she said, no, you're just having the flu.
Yeah, it's not a tumor. It's
no.
I'm a son of a nurse too, and I've had the same feeling, but I know many that might feel strangely uncomfortable with being confronted with an AI doing the first tentative diagnosis, but that would be quite happy to Google around and all of a sudden get all of the diagnoses that they could find. And another thing, I think this idea that ChatGPT actually passed the medical exam, I think it's worth our while to.
Could you elaborate on that? How did they do that? Is it just with the basic information that it has now, or did they provide additional information for?
So basically, this is an article from Insider, and it says that a doctor and Harvard computer scientist says ChatGPT-4 has better clinical judgment than many doctors, and that it can diagnose rare conditions just like he would do himself, and that it's also making grave mistakes, and that it hasn't sworn the Hippocratic Oath. So of course it has no ethical compass in that sense. So those are kind of the key headlines, and it's Dr. Isaac Cohen who has been messing around with the model a little bit and thought it could be interesting to see whether it would be possible to actually answer the U.S. medical exam that you have to pass in order to get a license in the US. And more than 90% of the time it would actually pass.
Wow.
So
and
that's
how is that compared to a human? Does it say anything about that? I mean,
not all humans pass all the time.
Well, obviously.
So I don't know if it's what rate it is. But another thing that it's really good at is that he's quoted to say GPT-4 is not just a good test taker and fact finder. It's also a great translator. So it's capable of translating discharge information for a patient who speaks Portuguese and distilling wonky technical jargon into something sixth graders would easily read.
Yeah.
And I find that to be quite true when I've been messing around and asked GPT to simplify texts. It does a really good job at that.
It does. And just considering it is a language model, so that is actually the thing that it should do best.
Yeah. And you know, the funny thing is that it's also able to educate doctors about bedside manners. So you know, it can offer tips on how to talk to patients about their condition in a compassionate way and in a clear language, which will sort of let the practitioner summarize the condition in a comprehensible way for the patient.
Yeah.
And you know, I was in at a doctor in Mexico, and it was a pretty grave situation. We thought there was an abortion coming, and we go to the gynecologist, and he's just looking at her and going like, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" and you know, I'm just really taken aback. Like this is, and he's looking at me like, "Why is she crying?"
Yeah.
I'm like, you know, it's the fear of abortion. You know, it doesn't sit well, you know. And it was, you know, he could use ChatGPT to teach him some bedside manners.
Yeah.
In order to sort of meet the patients in a good way. Everything went fine, and there's a living baby on the other end now. But it was a very stressful environment to be in, and definitely a practitioner that could use some bedside manners.
And that's also a thing now. Mexico is not an underdeveloped country, but you only need an internet connection to have access to all of the knowledge that you can gain from ChatGPT.
Yeah, but then I think one thing that we need to be mindful of when we're talking about generative AI is that it is in a way similar to a creative process. Mm-hmm. So the model is inventing a new answer every time. It's inventing that answer based on texts it has available. Mm-hmm. So therefore, it seems very likely that the answer it seems very truthful in a way. Yeah. And that's also why it's been compared to human intelligence, because we basically structure thoughts in a similar way, where we look at past experiences and we have pattern recognition skills in the human brain. Mm-hmm. And somehow we produce a hypothesis or a diagnosis that is in correspondence to the knowledge we have obtained or that we can confront with in a database or library or something. Yeah. But the language model is still inventing the answer in its essence. So it can have what we call a hallucination, where it invents something that just sounds incredibly true. It looks like something that's real. It passes the first glance sanity check. You know, it sounds reasonable. It looks reasonable. It may even have a source citation that it invented itself that cites the journal Nature, for instance. With a journal number and an article number inside that journal and a publication date. And all of those might exist, but the title might not match the numbers. No. So the title might never exist, but the journal and the journal number and the publication date might be correct. Yeah. So it's incredibly difficult to actually figure out whether or not it's true. Typically, if it's citing a concrete source, you should be skeptical and figure out if that source actually exists. Yeah. And if it exists, if it says anything about what it says. Yeah.
But this, at least for now, I don't know about the model number 4, but for now, we still need to be very skeptical. And we can only use it, as you said, as a kind of creative process, because we cannot trust the results. We have no way of fact-checking. No. At least not in a broad perspective, a way of fact-checking the results that it provides. So it's, for me, I use it as a way of pointing in a direction. So, okay, you are giving me this result, this piece of information, but I still need to use my own research capabilities or my own knowledge to say, is this true or not?
Yeah, for sure.
And when something is written down and when something is quoted with the citations I should just mentioned, we as humans we're stupid. We just think, okay, this is true.
Yeah,
I buy it.
Sounds valid.
So it's speaking into all of this fake news that we have so much of in this time.
I really hope that it will be able to provide sort of a source list of which are the key sources that it's basing the answers off of.
Yeah.
Because that way we would be able to double check and sort of do a fact checking and a citation checking on it.
Yeah.
And then it would be even more useful, of course. But if we're moving on to the other areas, then I'd like to go over the next three relatively briefly and then go into interviewing ChatIPCC.
Yeah, sure, let's do that.
So these are three use cases, concrete use cases that have been suggested. So one is to be able to log a note for general practitioners what's going on. So Simon enters the doctor. He has a itchy patch on his thigh. The doctor looks at it, and then it's actually able to use a generative AI to help with the note-taking. So that process becomes much smoother and that the patient journals are updated much faster, just with either by text to voice to text, but it could also add some of those indications from, I noticed there's a red rash and the size is just around this, then it will be able to help develop the hypothesis on behalf of the doctor without the doctor having to spell out all of the different parts of the diagnosis.
Yeah.
But the doctor would be able to just validate, okay, this sounds right, cool, we're running with that. Then it's able to provide an interpretation of novel cases. So if the doctor is confronted with a case where it seems new, I've never seen a case like this before as a doctor, my own hypothesis is A, B, and C, then rather than asking a colleague first, you could ask an AI first, and it could provide an answer. And then you could have actually a third triangulated opinion when you ask the colleague. Whereas I don't know if you've ever tried that at a GP. You go in, you have some weird condition, and they're like, whoa, never seen that one before. I'm going to have to call my colleague. And then you're kind of in doubt, is that because I'm a freak? or is this an actual professional courtesy? Usually somehow I buy into the whole illusion that it will always be a professional courtesy, of course, but you do have that that system that is quite inefficient of calling a colleague to come and provide a second opinion when in doubt, whereas it would be really useful to have an artificial intelligence library that could provide a sound second hypothesis, and then if those two are aligned, you could say, okay, then I trust my own opinion more. And then if the third opinion is also aligned, then you could trust it even more.
Yeah.
And, I think that's an interesting way to go about it.
And tracking back to one of the first questions we had, would you trust an AI to be the first contact with the health system? Here you have the knowledge of the database that the chat OpenAI could provide. And you have the human interaction and the human reasoning behind it. I would absolutely trust that. I would love that to be a part of my visit to the physician.
Because then it actually becomes an augmented clinical process, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's when we can use AI to augment existing processes, then we should get a high degree of precision in diagnosis and treatment. And therefore become more efficient and be able to deliver more care per unit of economic and unit of carbon that we expend. Then there's the whole screening and gating for calls where, as an access into a telemedicine system, having a chatbot that does some of those initial questions, I think could be really, really powerful.
So, an example, you would call 1813, as we have here in Denmark, which is not the 112 or 911 in other countries. You call them, and then there will be a voice recognition chatbot in the other end saying, hello, welcome, what are your symptoms? And then it would start listing up all of the symptoms or problems that you have on a prompter for the actual doctor or nurse in the other end, or how is it?
Yeah, it could be something like that. I think it would be in economies where it's difficult to staff the phones for emergency response, where it could be helpful if it could help screen out the calls and figure out, is this a life and death situation? Yes, it is. Okay, then you go to the fast track line.
Okay.
Is this a broken finger? Yes, it is. Okay, we need to take that quite seriously. Here's a few things you can do at home to do your own first aid treatment of this injury that you sustained or that someone you're close to has sustained. And then we will make a plan for the emergency response accordingly. So that's what is often forgotten by people that don't work in the industry, that the emergency room is not the trauma room. The emergency room is, I'm so broken I can't wait to go to the doctor, but I'm not so broken I cannot wait in line.
Yeah.
And
your life is not necessarily depending on treatment right now.
Oftentimes people are thinking emergency room, that's the bullet wound place. But in most cases, the emergency room is, I lost a brick, I dropped a brick on my big toe and it's completely smashed to pieces and I need to receive medical attention, but it's still there. I'm not bleeding to death. The nail fell off, but I need a treatment.
You're gonna survive.
I'm definitely going to survive that, right? And I think one can just look back at one's own experiences of being in the emergency room, and those are not emergencies. It's just because we designed the system in such a way, and I think there could potentially be something, and of course for a lot of people that go to the ER, they might be able to do a lot of it at home if they have eyes available. They could probably reduce the harm and provide some solid first aid under a bit of supervision, and then go to their own doctors rather than go to the emergency room and save a lot of time.
So in fact, actually having that, but screening out the patients could also prevent some from going to the hospital. And as you've said many times before, the best patient is actually the one not coming to the hospital, because that saves a lot of CO2. So in this instance, the bot could actually save us for a lot of CO2.
Yeah, and I think a lot of folks get really frustrated when they go to the emergency room and they have to wait for 6 hours in line because they're just not the most urgent patient to attend to. And that's the experience of many who have, maybe you have a kid that fell off a bed, hit her head, and you need to go and see if it's a concussion. There's going to be a lot of emergencies that are more urgent in the ER than that one.
Yeah.
So you're going to get a seat way back in the line. And maybe an AI could also help organize the availability of time and predict when should you come here, when will we be able to attend to you, considering that the injury you've sustained is of this and that type. And we could also make sure that there's a specialist in concussion. We can see that she's available at this time. So if you're here by that time, she'll be able to attend to you. You won't have to wait in line. You can just wait where you are. And then when you get here, it'll be resolved. So those could be examples, but I think the possibilities are basically endless.
Yeah.
But of course, we would need to have huge focus on the ethical concerns in it. I think that's also the main stumbling block. And then focus on patient safety, because just imagine the risk of that bot missing something that a human mind would pick up on, that I can't feel the left side of my face. Okay, you are having a stroke. That's an obvious case that I would know. Fred, the anthropologist, would know that case. Yeah. I'm sure the AI would know that case as well, but there might be something else where
some other symptoms that are not just as clear, that could be
where that medical experience would actually be able to help there.
Is it my heart? Is it my stomach? Could be the same thing.
Because the AI would probably trust the input data from the patient.
Yeah.
And not necessarily be able to say, oh, can you be a bit more specific? You said you had something in your shoulder, but did you actually mean your rib cage?
Yeah.
Or, something like that.
Yeah. So definitely still need humans. So don't be afraid of losing any jobs anytime soon, but just doing things more effectively, perhaps.
Yeah, and augmenting the efforts by humans and trained professionals. That's also a generative AI generally works best for experts within their field as an augmentation of their expertise, because then an expert will be more likely to spot a hallucination when it occurs. But we talked about interviewing chat IPCC, so the language model that is trained on the IPCC data. And I've asked it, how might generative AI in healthcare help reduce CO2 emissions from the healthcare sector?
What did it say?
Yeah, da-da-da-da.
And could you please write it to me in a simple way? I'm 5 years old, please. Help me out here.
Yeah, I can ask it to simplify after. So it says, generative AI in healthcare can help reduce CO2 emissions from the healthcare sector by enhancing energy-efficient control, reducing transaction costs for energy production and distribution, improving demand-side management, and reducing the need for physical transport. And then it's citing a chapter in the IPCC report. Digital technologies, including AI, have the potential to reduce material demand and promote energy management, increase the role of demand-side management, and support the shift away from asset redundancy. However, there is no specific information on how generative AI in healthcare can reduce CO2 emissions from the healthcare sector. So this is a very typical ChatGPT style answer when it's flip-flopping a little bit and it's fishing, waving, not being too concrete, saying that, it's by enhancing energy efficient control, reducing transaction costs for energy production and energy distribution, improving demand side management, reducing need for physical transport. There's a few things there that are not wrong, but they're also not specific enough for it to be a really convincing answer. But some of it is actually touching upon the things that we have already gone over. So I find that impressive. Then it's also talking about the support the shift away from asset redundancy. And I think that's a really great point, that we have a lot of asset redundancy in healthcare that is very CO2 intensive, not very convenient, not very practical always. And we have very narrow windows where, particularly for drugs and medtech devices, they have very short expiry dates. Yeah. And this is an area where an AI-managed asset distribution tool could actually make sure that the anesthetic gases that we need are always in stock. We can predict when we're going to have a peak need, and we can also make sure that we are distributing the resources in a way that is economically sensible.
Yeah, so you won't have any drugs, for instance, in one department going old, and they actually need them in another department.
Where they will then purchase new drugs. Yes, that would be an example. Same for like inhalers or injection devices or whatever it may be that could run on date. But
what if you...
But I think it could be interesting if we enter the question you said, if you could please explain this in a simple way, providing a few concrete examples. Could you please explain this in a simple way and provide tangible, real-world examples that are relatable to the average American, let's say American. Then it's thinking. I find this chat IPCC to be thinking for a long while longer than ChatGPT. That's really fast. This one is, but it's also a free-to-use service, so I think that makes sense. There's also a disclaimer on the website saying, please note that chat IPCC is not endorsed by IPCC, and there is a high chance that chat IPCC is hallucinating, may occasionally produce harmful instructions or biased content, and may occasionally generate incorrect information.
So even though, as we spoke about earlier, it's citating the IPCC report, you actually still need to do a fact check of that because it could, again, be hallucinating.
Yeah. I mean, it provided two very specific references before, and
Yeah.
I think if we go and check them, they may or may not be correct. Now it has provided a more simple answer, or simple language answer. So it says, policymakers can encourage people to make environmentally friendly choices, not only by offering economic incentives like carbon pricing, but also by using interventions that take into account how people make decisions and form habits. For example, they can make green options the default choice, increase taxes on products that are bad for the environment, or tighten regulations to encourage people to shift towards more sustainable behaviors. One real-world example of this is when a city set up a bike-sharing program to encourage people to use bikes instead of cars. By making bikes easily accessible and convenient, people are more likely to choose this option over driving a car. Another example, when a grocery store puts the healthier food options at eye level and in prominent locations, making it more likely for people to choose those options over less healthy ones. It's important to consider the diversity of people and cultures when making decisions about climate change. Climate information should be tailored to specific needs and values of different communities. There are disagreements about how to balance economic growth with environmental sustainability and how to measure well-being. This can make it difficult to make decisions about how to address climate change. Finally, cities can play a big role in reducing emissions by designing infrastructure and services in a way that encourages sustainable behaviors. For example, by investing in public transportation and renewable energy, cities can reduce the amount of energy people use and make it easier for them to make environmentally friendly choices. So in short, it had nothing to do with what we asked it initially. And I think that's a great example of missing those contextual pieces that a human would have. You know, if I was interviewing a human expert on this, they would say something along the lines that a generative AI in healthcare can help reduce CO2 emissions from the healthcare sector in a range of different ways. Option A would be to help with energy efficient control. Option B could be reducing transaction costs for energy production and distribution. Option C would be asset management and addressing the redundancy system in hospital asset management systems. You know, something like that, where that would actually be what a human expert would do, where an AI is just producing a buckload of more text and telling us about bike sharing systems in cities. So I think that's an interesting case to sort of also bring a little bit of peace of mind that the robots are going to take our jobs, but it's probably not going to be by 2023.
But I actually disagree. I don't think robots are gonna take our jobs. We are still needed because the robots or the AIs are going to help us, as we said, with the augmentation. And they can, in my line of work, do the subtitles. Okay, then some people are going to lose their jobs, I know. But what if my job is doing subtitles? I now have an AI to help me do that. And then I can have more customers and actually make more money, hopefully. So I don't think that it's not that black and white. I think that AI are going to help us do our jobs, and then we can be more efficient in other ways.
Oh, definitely. No, you're absolutely right. And I think it's also about an AI doesn't have a need or a desire to express itself. It doesn't have a sense of artistic expression. Humans can have that. An AI also doesn't have the same way of the potential to be mission driven or driven by meaning. Humans have that, and that will drive us into making different choices than an AI would. So I think with those final notes, let's wrap up the generative AI episode. Thanks for taking part, Simon. That was a great pleasure sharing this with you.
Thank you for having me again.
Anytime. I'm sure we're going to need that for a few more times in the future. for all of you out there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast. We have been the top 5% most shared podcast on Spotify, so please do keep on sharing. It really means the world to us. If you will please subscribe to the show. If you are not subscribed already, that's a great help. It helps us book more interesting speakers and guests on the show. It also helps get the message out there, and it helps you stay on top of what's going on in the healthcare sector. And this is something we cover every week. Every Monday we release a new episode. Thank you so much for listening, for sharing your thoughts, for commenting, for suggesting guests that we can bring onto the show. It really, as I said before, means the world to us. So on behalf of the entire Green Innovation Group team, thank you for listening to the Sustainable Healthcare Podcast.
This episode was edited with the help of an AI tool. Sorry, Simon, I'm taking your job.